In the opening scene, Hiragi Saikai, a second-year bottom-feeder high school student, finds himself in a weird cave after he is transported to another world. While walking barefoot in the cave, a shining golden light brings a young red-headed woman with a large chest to him. Seconds after seeing him, the woman hugs and drools all over him, asking him to marry her. However, Saikai, who's yet to process the entire situation, shrieks and pushes the woman's large chest away. So it all began on this fateful day. As usual, Saikai just had another session of bullying from his classmates. Considering his big size, there was little to nothing he could do to defend himself from their verbal attacks. He just lies on the floor dejected and out of strength. Moments after his bullying session, someone claiming to be God speaks out from the school's PA system. He orders the students to sit at their desks to hear the important announcement he has for them. After mentioning his plans for them to transport them to another world to be heroes, the godlike voice starts granting each student their special abilities and stats to survive in the strange new world. Naturally, everyone, including Saikai, receives boosts in abilities like magic, luck, charm, strength, and a few other things one would need to survive. Moving on, the godlike dude advises the students to form groups to up their chances of survival in the new world. He gives them 10 minutes to do that. While waiting, Saikai asks to join some people. However, nobody wanted to join the fatso dude with little to no known stats. When time is finally up, the man transports everyone to the new world. Saikai, however, is left behind as he's without a teammate. The godlike dude takes mercy on him and grants him a special ability before transporting him to the worst place possible. Saikai finds himself in a forest with barely enough supplies to survive. He mustered up the courage to build himself from down up, but then his immense hunger just couldn't let him walk. As he lies on the ground helplessly, he finds a grub walking in front of him and stretches his hand to get the grub. However, he just couldn't get it in time. Saikai gives up eventually and checks around the spot he's in. Just then, he finds a weird fruit and checks it out. His analytical ability identifies the fruit as the fruit of evolution. Rather than conduct more investigation on the fruit, Saikai allows his hunger to overtake him as he eats the fruit voraciously. Seconds after eating the food, a voice assistant speaks to him and activates the effects of the fruit of evolution. Saikai ignores the voice and strolls around the forest. He finds a few monkeys flocking around the 9 fruits of evolution. Saikai waits till the monkeys get distracted so he can take some of the fruits for himself. When he gets his chance, Saikai takes it. While at it, he finds some recovery potions and takes them all for himself. On the other side of the continent, everyone from Saikai's class gathered around in a yard. Kanazuki, the class representative, does a roll call and finds out Saikai's missing. Meanwhile, Saikai finds a mushroom and checks his screen to find something about it. However, when he finds out that even his database doesn't have anything about it, he decides to eat it. Seconds after eating the mushroom, however, Saikai faints and becomes paralyzed. He manages to get himself back up to eat one more fruit of evolution. Despite the taste being bitter as hell, Saikai still manages to enjoy it. In a split second, Saikai's body begins experiencing the effects of the fruit. As his stats increase, the monkeys return to their spot and attack Saikai. Saikai drinks some of the recovery potions and faces the monkey. However, the monkey slaps the heck out of him and prepares to eat him. However, the stench from Saikai's wound kills the monkey and turns him into lootable items. Saikai picks up the items and acquires a bunch of new skills to his arsenal. He checks out a book of knowledge on the clever monkey and finds out new information about it. Then, his body undergoes a painful evolution that lasts for some minutes. After the evolution, Saikai wakes up slimmer and more handsome. He checks his database for what evolution means and finds out he's evolved just once out of 10 times. 5 months later, Saikai gets used to living in the forest. After acquiring dozens of skills, he now hunts arkwolves and the like without any issues. In one of his hunts, he collects a legendary weapon and also learns how to use water magic. Just then, he evolves for the 9th time and becomes much better than before. Moments after his evolution, he's surrounded by monkeys. This time, they show up with their pink boss, Saria the gorilla. Saikai checks the level and shrieks in fear after finding out how strong it is. He tries reasoning with the gorilla but attacks him nonetheless. After realizing how strong Saikai is, Saria is impressed and reveals herself as a female gorilla. Saria attacks Saikai a few more times and falls in love with him. He stops fighting him and asks Saikai to be with him. Saikai, however, tries to attack the gorilla but Saria dodges the attack and tries to attack Saikai. Saikai dodges and tries to use magic on the gorilla. He summons his dagger and conjures a water spell on himself. Surprisingly, the water spell hits him and leaves him vulnerable to the gorilla attacks. Saria punches the shit out of Saikai and waits to see his next attack. Saikai, after receiving his attacks, decides to use his stench to stop the gorilla from attacking him. However, Saria stops his attack midway and carries Saikai away to his lair. After spending his first night in Saria's lair, Saikai wakes up to find the breakfast Saria cooked for him. Initially, he refuses to eat out of the food. However, his hunger takes control again and Saikai is forced to eat. Saikai eats the gorilla's food and is amazed at how delicious it is. Saria uses the opportunity to pitch the idea of marriage to Saikai again. However, Saikai isn't ready to marry any gorilla. After their breakfast, Saria walks off to do the dishes. Saikai considers running out of the cave for his freedom. However, Saria is back in no time and shows him some books he's to read to survive in the forest. Saikai reads the book and learns the wash spell and a few other convenient spells he's meant to learn. Saria asks him to marry her again, but this time, Saikai tells her no. A few hours later, Saikai and Saria go on a fishing trip. Saikai tries to escape, but then he gets attacked by a huge spider. Saria shows up, saves Saikai just in time and takes him home. On getting back to the hideout, Saria serves them another lunch to feed themselves. While eating, the duo discuss the fruit of evolution. Saria explains the fruit of evolution to Saikai and complains about someone stealing his latest stock of fruit. Saikai confesses and asks for Saria's forgiveness for stealing his fruit of evolution. Saria, however, lets him off the hook and asks him to marry her. Saikai, however, reminds the gorilla that love between both of them is virtually impossible. This disheartens Saria and she asks Saikai if he truly hates her. However, Saikai tells her he's totally fine with her being herself. Saria smiles and heads out of the cave. Later on, the students from Saikai's high school complain about their commander's way of training. Apparently, they're to be trained to acquire basic combat training. However, the students think they're strong enough to get by on their own. Their commanders order them to stay and get proper training before letting them off. In the meantime, Saikai finally escapes from Saria's hideout. Saria finds out about his escape and chases after him. However, Saikai keeps on using his instant speed to run faster than the gorilla. At one point, he approaches another weird cave shaped like a dungeon and thinks twice before entering it. However, as Saria gets closer to him, he's forced to enter. Inside the cave, Saikai finds a skeleton ghost thingy who disguises himself as a level 1 villain. Saikai, however, figures out his real level is level 500 and tries to run away. However, the skeleton thing stops him and extends his sword to stab him. Saria the gorilla takes the hit and gets fatally injured. The skeleton lets Saikai have his last moments with the gorilla. Saria thanks Saikai for the fun time she spent with him and wishes she had more time to spend with him. As she closes her eyes to death, Saikai gets really pissed. He summons his dagger and teleports to different spots to attack the skeleton. However, the skeleton could read his every move, so he was able to counter the attacks pretty well. Saikai changes his tactics and uses his water magic spell to take down the skeleton. The skeleton, however, deflects the attacks and urges Saikai to accept his death. Saikai, however, wasn't ready to give up just yet. He charges up his legs and teleports instantly to stab the skeleton in the chest. The skeleton smiles and thanks Saikai for freeing him from his bondage. Then, it disappears into the wind and reunites with his lover. At that point, Saria had already died. Suddenly, a golden light appears and Saria the gorilla is transformed into a beautiful human female. Saikai recovers the Book of Knowledge on his latest enemy. In his past life, the skeleton, who was named Xenos, used to be such a wonderful person. However, the Emperor's jealousy actually caught up to him and forced him to flee from the kingdom with his lover to live in exile for the rest of his life. After reading the story, Saikai and the new Saria cry over how sad the story is. Once they're done crying, Saikai opens the chest and finds some clothes for Saria. Saria compliments how cool Saikai is and urges him to open the box again. Having acquired the necessary items, Saikai undergoes evolution again. Once he's done with the umpteenth evolution, he faces Saria and asks her to follow him to the nearest town nearby. Saria agrees to follow him everywhere he goes. Just then, the dungeon evolution guard appears as a floating sheep wearing a suit. He introduces himself as Mr. Sheep and grants Saikai the reward for defeating the skeleton ghost. The gift, which is a bunch of seeds for cultivating the fruit of evolution and a full face mask, is granted to Saikai before he's teleported out of the dungeon. Saikai and Saria find themselves on the grassy plains near the dungeon. Saikai holds Saria's hands and begins their journey towards the nearest town. As they trek the grassy plains in search of the nearest town, Saikai tells Saria his plan. So he plans on getting to an adventurers guild to register and get their proof of identification so they can get by in the town. After walking a few meters more, they run into a blue slime at level 88. Saikai is shocked at the high level of the slime. However, the slime attacks him, but Saikai uses his strong weapons to take it out. Then, he recovers the lootable items, which are a pair of boots and 2 cards. Saikai holds the cards and uses them to level up. After leveling up, his full face mask morphs into a cloak and a letter. Saikai reads the letter and finds out that the mask evolved because he's leaving his humanity behind. At least now, he can fully hide his power without anybody figuring it out. The letter self-destructs and leaves Saria and Saikai to continue their journey towards the nearest town. Saikai puts on his cloak and walks with Saria, who adores her new boots, to the nearest town. A few hours later, they arrive at the nearest town. At the gates, they find Claude, who's shocked about their lack of a valid ID. Not to worry though, as he urges them to place their hands on a special orb so he can get a reading of their essence. After confirming their essence is fine, he allows them in and wishes them a safe visit. Before getting inside, Saikai asks Claude about the Adventurers Guild. Claude is surprised at his question and warns him not to get to that god-awful place. The place is filled with creeps and is only meant to be for creeps only. Nevertheless, Saikai and Saria locate the guild. On opening the door, Saikai finds the receptionist and one of the warriors there performing BDSM together. Saikai closes the door to take that in. Then, he opens the guild again and finds what Claude warned them about earlier. Saikai tries to cover Saria's eyes, but then the head of the guild, Guskel, who's also a muscular guy who loves flexing, shows up and pushes the duo into the guild. Saikai and Saria are forced to enter and register at the Adventurers Guild. The receptionist, Eris, changes her clothes into a more professional one and welcomes Saikai and Saria to the guild. She urges them to forget about the weirdos they find at the guild and just register for their own reasons only. Saria draws Saikai's attention to the people having fun in the guild and tells him to join so they can have fun just like them. Saikai finally decides to join the guild. As he signs the papers, 2 weirdly dressed dudes arrive and invite Saikai to see their boss at the back. Saikai follows them outside and finds out that their boss, who's gay and a pervert, wants to have fun with his butthole. Saikai shrivels and bails out before he finds out what happens when you drop the soap in prison. The 3 guys chase after him, but then they get tired and lose him. Saikai returns to the guild that evening and reunites with Saria. Eris and Guskel commend him for being the first person to resist their charms. Saikai asks Guskel to do something about the 3, but Guskel tells him there's nothing he can do. Moving on, Eris explains the next step in their registration process. They're to undergo some tests to see what missions would fit them. However, before they can take the tests, they have to be supervised by at least a B-rank adventurer. Luckily for them, a troublesome A-rank adventurer named Artoria arrives just in time. Saikai stares at her large chest and gets lost in it. Artoria tries to talk Saikai out of accepting her as their test proctor. However, Saikai doesn't mind her being his teacher. Artoria discusses things with Guskel and reluctantly allows them to get under her tutelage. Up next, Artoria takes the duo out to complete their first test, which is to take out some odd tests. After explaining the nature of the odd jobs, Artoria smiles and warms the hearts of Saikai and Saria. On their first test, they visit an orphanage and take some of the children out to play. One of the kids injures himself and Artoria steps up to heal the little boy. As she does so, however, one of the planks falls down and nearly hits Artoria. Luckily, Artoria uses her defense spell to save herself and the boy. After helping out at the orphanage, Artoria takes Saikai on their next quest, which is demolishing a building. Saikai gets too forward and walks into the building. He touches one of the walls and the entire building crashes on him. Artoria immediately gets emotional and rushes over to dig Saikai out of the rubble. Turns out she's always believed to bring calamity to anybody who follows her. Luckily for her, Saikai digs himself out of the rubble and chuckles. Artoria scolds him hard to make sure he doesn't try anything risky ever again. Saikai gets the point, so he thanks Artoria and continues the next mission. Back in the royal capital, the commander leading the training of the high schoolers complains to his subordinate, Offer, about the kingdom's plan to use the students in their war against demons. He knows some of them will die in the war but still hasn't accepted it yet. At that instant, Saikai finds out about his third test, which is walking a wolf dog. The wolf dog chases Saikai all around town while Artoria and the owner of the dog laugh and discuss with each other. Thankfully, Saikai ends the test in one piece. He returns to the guild and gets the payment for the job. Before they head out of the guild, Guskel and Eris ask Saikai and Saria if they have a place to stay. Since they don't have any, Artoria invites them to stay over at her own inn pending the time they find another inn to stay at. On their next test, Artoria tells them to harvest some medicinal herbs and bring them there to her. If they can harvest enough, then they will pass the test. Almost immediately, Saikai rushes into the forest nearby to find medicinal herbs. Saria follows suit, leaving Artoria with a smile on her face. Artoria recognizes the smile on her face and stops herself from getting too attached to her two new students. This is so that her misfortune doesn't affect them in the long run. Minutes later, the duo return with the medicinal herbs. Saria gets the test right and submits 10 medicinal herbs. Saikai, on the other hand, returns with some rare mushrooms and fails the test. Saikai asks for a second chance and rushes back to the forest to find some herbs to pass the test. While in the forest, he searched the entire vegetation for medicinal herbs, but just couldn't find any. He overhears 3 people discussing something about human realms and defying their master, Leia. Saikai eavesdrops on their conversation a little bit and decides to ask if they've seen the medicinal herbs. He gets out of his vegetation and asks if they've seen the medicinal herbs. However, the 3 dudes throw a fit as they never wanted a human to find out about them. After that, they introduce themselves as Terry, Bosco, and Belle and make an entrance scene to show how cool and awesome they are. Saikai ignores them and continues his search. However, the 3 of them stop him from going and call on their troll to deal with Saikai. The troll arrives and tries to crush Saikai with his big wood, but Saikai blocks the attacks with a defense spell he calls Absorb Skill, and crushes the wood in the troll's hand. The 3 doofuses run away scared of Saikai the monster. Saikai returns to his teacher as a failure and begs for her forgiveness. Artoria gives him 5 other medicinal herbs and passes him so they can advance to the next test. Upon getting back to their hideout, Belle, Bosco, and Terry are punished by their master, Leia, for acting out on their own accord. The following day, Saikai and Saria bump into Claude again. Claude finds out about their test proctor and commends them for being with the right person. Artoria returns with the items they'll need for their final test. Then, they greet Claude goodbye and head out to the grassy plains for the second test. Artoria explains their second test to be a hunting test. While on the plains, Saikai and Saria are to defeat 10 slimes to pass the final test. The first slime comes by and lunges at Saikai. Saikai raises his sword to slice the slime, but then the slime gets teleported somewhere else. Artoria checks out the field and finds out that it's been trapped with teleportation spells. She immediately abandons the test and urges her students to follow her back to the guild. However, on their way out of the plains, Artoria steps on a teleportation spell and transports all of them into an underground tunnel network. Before figuring out their location, Artoria asks Saikai and Saria why they opted into the spell with her instead of just abandoning her. Saikai and Saria tell her their bodies just moved on their own. Artoria smiles and gives Saikai a guide stone which he can use to locate any of them should they get separated. Saikai and Saria nod in agreement to her explanation and wait for her to move forward. Artoria steps into a trap and activates a solid wall that separates her from Saikai and Saria. She tried hitting the wall down but couldn't get it to break. Saikai, on the other hand, tries using his fist to break down the wall. However, it didn't budge. They even try using the guide stone, but it still doesn't work. Saria gets an idea and asks her partner to follow her. In the meantime, Artoria faces a mummy and defeats it after taking a few ghastly hits. Saikai and Saria keep hitting dead ends upon dead ends. One time, they ran into a chest that could talk. They turn their back to leave the chest, but the chest urges them to open it. It lunges towards them for an attack, but Saikai takes care of it quickly. The chest meets its demise and opens itself up. Inside, Saikai finds a book of knowledge about the chest. Apparently, the chest used to be a popular box. However, with the invention of the item box, the chest quickly fell out of use. This made the chest angry and developed a will of its own. The chest tried to get humans to use it back then, but then humans chased it away as they feared the chest. After reading the chest's book, Saria shows Saikai the guide stone that was glowing red. Saikai checks it and realizes that it can only mean that Artoria's life is in danger. Turns out Artoria's life truly was in danger as she accidentally entered the cave of the most feared black dragon demon. Saikai, after finding out about the glowing red crystal, becomes worried about their teacher's state. Saikai gets pissed at the wall and keeps punching it till it gives way. At that point, Artoria uses her Calamity Berserk ability to fight the black dragon demon. However, even her strongest power still wasn't good enough to take down the powerful dragon. She tries all she can to take the demon down. Sadly, the demon was much stronger than her. He stabs and immobilizes her and then proceeds to finish her off with his fire. Artoria gives up on life and waits for the Grim Reaper. However, she's saved by Saikai and Saria, who block the path of the fire with Saikai's cloak. Artoria opens her eyes and is shocked to see her people there to save her. She asks Saikai how he managed to break past the thick wall to save her. Saikai tells her he just broke through the wall like he meant and raced down to the dungeon to save their master who was in danger. With the black demon dragon still hot on their trail, Saikai gives Artoria a recovery potion. He puts her in Seria's care and gets ready to face the demon dragon. He calls out the dragon and unsheathes his twin swords to take it down. The dragon breathes out fire at Saikai. However, Saikai gets out of the way and attacks him from above. The black dragon blocks his attacks and gives him little time to assess his skills. After realizing the dragon is at level 500, Saikai tries to use Absorb and Bind Resistance, but it doesn't work. The dragon gets understandably pissed and decides to finish off Saikai with his Hell's Inferno. Seria urges Saikai to use the Fall Disaster Water spell to water down the Hell Inferno. Saikai uses the spell right this time to stop the Hell's Inferno before it's complete. The dragon gets even more irritated and traps Saikai in an intimidation spell. This time, Saikai breaks himself free of the spell and lunges at the dragon to use his ultimate skill on him. He activates all the ultimate skills he has in his arsenal and slices the dragon into oblivion. The dragon shed tears after his crushing defeat and disappeared into thin air. Saikai kneels and wonders why the demon hates humans so much. Just then, the voice assistant begins leveling up his abilities to his current strength. Seria hugs him and asks him how he plans on getting them out of the dungeon. Saikai gets worried as he doesn't know what to do. He gets up to check out the item box the dragon left, hoping to see some clues on how to get out of the dungeon. He touches one of the items there and acquires the black dragon's body parts. Saikai eats the body part and gains spatial magic. Saikai smiles and finally gets an idea of how to get them back home. He checks out the chest again and finds the Black Conqueror's long coat. After putting it on, he checks out the last item in the box, which is the Book of Knowledge explaining the dragon's past life. Apparently, the Black Dragon used to be a deity for humans. However, due to their own greed, the humans sought to harvest their parts to make weapons. Thankfully, the Black Demon was saved by the Demon Lord back then. However, the humans summoned heroes to take care of the Demon Lord and sealed the dragon in his dungeon for all eternity. Ever since then, the Black Dragon had sworn vengeance on the human race. This time, Saikai cries and apologizes to the Black Dragon for ending its life so nonchalantly. They receive another letter from Mr. Sheep informing them that they've failed the test to make the Demon Lord reunite with his Black Dragon again. Saikai shouts at Mr. Sheep and begs him to get out of their heads. Mr. Sheep leaves and Saikai teleports himself, Artoria, and Seria back to the royal capital. Artoria wakes up in Saikai's arms as they approach the capital and urges him to take his hands off her. Saikai orders her to stay put to avoid opening her injuries. Artoria calms herself and shows them her defect. Apparently, she was born with a lack of a -2 million. She's been cursed to bring misfortune to anybody who tries to be with her. Saikai and Seria appreciate her being in their lives and urge her to quit thinking like that. They return to the guild and find out that everyone has been searching for them ever since they found out they were missing. Artoria cries softly and runs away from the guild. Saikai goes after her to make sure she doesn't run into trouble again. Elsewhere, the three doofuses from earlier play a little game of blackjack when their master, Lady Leia, shows up bearing bad news. She informs them of the defeat of the Black Demon and informs her people to be wary of people. After searching everywhere for her, Saikai decides to ask around for her location. He finds one of the noble ladies who tells him a little more about Artoria. She beseeches Saikai to try talking to Artoria so she can believe in herself again. Saikai nods in agreement and heads outside the royal capital to find Artoria. He reaches the demolished building and finds her sitting there with her head buried in her hands. He calls her name and talks with her. Artoria asks him if she really can be someone that others would like. Saikai tells her not to worry too much about a useless stat. As long as she has friends in him, she will make a genuine smile one day. In the meantime, Seria gets worried about Saikai and Artoria. Saikai, on the other hand, hugs Artoria and experiences a moment of silence between the two of them. Artoria sheepishly thanks Saikai for being there for her when she needed him the most. Saikai tells her it's nothing and that he's just looking out for a friend. He gives her the Ring of Happiness, a legendary item he got earlier. He puts the ring on her finger and assures her that it'll negate her curse and double her luck. He then continues on to tell Artoria the sweetest words ever, making her blush everywhere. Eventually, Artoria pushes him away and runs away. Saikai keeps wondering what he did to warrant such a treatment from Artoria. Then again, he decides to let her be now that she's back to normal. That night, Artoria returns to the capital worried about her heart rate increasing anytime she's around Saikai. Little did she know that was slowly falling in love with Saikai. The following day, Saikai buries his head in his hands during breakfast. He recalls his earlier meeting with Artoria and concludes that she's avoiding him. He asks Saria what she thinks and Saria tells him not to worry too much about things. Instead, they should enjoy their day and have fun while doing it. After breakfast, Saria heads out to the orphanage to complete her quest. Saikai, on the other hand, heads out to learn more about the strange new world he's been summoned to. First off, he visits the guild to ask for more information from Eris and Guskel. However, the two of them are of no help at all. Saikai begins to lose hope. Just then, Guskel gives him a good suggestion. He tells him about the rumors of another country summoning heroes from another world to fight some demon lord or something. This naturally piques Saikai's interest, so he asks them where he can find more information about this demon lord. Guskel shows him the way to the royal library. Saikai thanks them for their help and heads there immediately. Elsewhere, the king of the other country complains about Zakia's reluctance to train the kids they summoned from another world. Turns out Zakia is the commander complaining earlier on about sending the kids off to fight a war they know nothing about. This was a major that the king wanted solved immediately. His right-hand man cooks up something sinister and asks the king to send the kids to the Barbador Magic Academy. This way, they can learn the ropes of magic and be ready to fight in no time. The king thinks about the possibilities and asks how the man plans on convincing the students to go. The man takes out a bunch of enchantment bracelets that they'll force the students to wear. Meanwhile, Artoria is seen racing through the street as she struggles to understand why her heart beats so fast when thinking about Saikai. Saikai, however, has trouble grasping the truth from the library as the books he reads always try to paint the dragons and demons to be the bad guys. He gets tired of seeing the same thing over and over again. So, he takes out a bunch of grimoires and learns all the spells there. Saria seems to be having loads of fun with the children as she constantly morphs back and forth into her gorilla state. Saikai becomes hungry and gets out of the library to catch a break and a good meal. He finds a lady with dog ears in the town selling some stuff and buys some of her merchandise. As he picks the item to check out, a sweet smell comes from a corner and entices Saikai's belly. He follows the smell to a cafe. Upon entering it, he finds the owner and one other dude doing their thing. Artoria wanders into an alleyway and finds her noble friend, Adriana, there. Adriana asks her on a date so she can explain her feelings to her. After finishing a hot bowl of pasta, he introduces himself to the humble commoner beside him. The commoner introduces Nohat, the cafe owner, to him and gets to discuss the Eastern and Western cultures. As they settle for some tea, Adriana finally explains Artoria's feelings to her. She's in love with Saikai. Artoria has a hard time believing it, seeing as it's her first time. However, when she does believe it, she asks Adriana to help her find a way to convey her feelings to Saikai. Saikai, however, explains the gift he gave Artoria earlier. After hearing that he gave a lady a ring on her left ring finger, the two dudes urge him to marry the girl or face dire consequences by the law. At this point, Saikai is confused. The man, however, advises him to go meet the girl and let her know his feelings before it's too late. However, Saikai tells them that he already has a woman in his mind. Ranz, the commoner, tells him to consider dating the two women. The more the merrier, like they say. Saikai considers their thoughts and thanks them for the advice before leaving. Later on, Saikai is seen walking towards the inn thinking about his decision. He eventually gives an option to give Artoria an answer the following day. In the meantime, he'd spend his time with Saria before going to bed. Just outside the inn, Artoria catches up to Saikai and calls him. Without saying a word, she walks close to him and plants a kiss on his lips. Saikai tries to explain himself to her. However, Artoria tells him to zip it. She already knows what he thinks of her, but she just can't help herself. She's in love with Saikai and would do anything to stand by his side. Saikai clenches his fist and decides to tell her anyway. Before he hurts Artoria, Saria shows up and gives Saikai her permission to date them both. Saikai gets very emotional and promises to love both of them till death does their part. He holds Artoria's cheeks and gives her a final look of determination before planting the softest kiss on her. Saria joins them and cheers to a wonderful time together. Shortly afterwards, they all wed each other with their friends as witnesses. In another scene, a possessed horse-like silhouette with red eyes is seen hiding and ready to make its move. A few days after his wedding with Saria and Artoria, Saikai returns to the guild to take on more quests. One morning, while he eats, Guskel shows up flexing his muscles as usual. When he's done with his usual nonsense, he asks Saikai and Saria if they have horses. Horses are for high-ranking adventurers and it's a must to have them. Following that, he gives Saikai a map that takes him to a well-known stable in town. Saikai takes a look at the map and asks for help from his girls. However, none of them are less busy, so he has to get there on his own. Saikai eventually manages to get there in one piece. He walks over to the counter and asks the stableman to show him some good horses. The stableman asks him if he's going to join the Royal Cup horse race. However, Saikai refuses to answer him. So, the stableman takes him to check out a few horses that he may like. The first few horses are literal dogshit. The stableman even introduces Saikai to a stuffed horse toy, hoping Saikai would be fooled enough to buy it. Just as Saikai is about to give up on his search, the stableman shows him the most troublesome donkey in the entire stable. He tries petting it, but the donkey gets violent and kicks the hell out of the stableman. Saikai acquires the skill to understand donkey language that instant and finds out that the donkey is a proud one. Apparently, the donkey didn't see the stableman or Saikai as worthy to ride it. She attacks Saikai and forces him to show her his immense strength. Impressed by his power, the donkey decides to serve him forever. She introduces herself as Lulun and pledges to remain loyal to Saikai till she dies. Saikai buys the donkey and takes her out of the stable. As they roam around town, Lulun finds some delicious dumpling treats and asks Saikai to get some for her. Saikai gets some dumplings for her and himself. The duo eat their fill and continue their tour of the town. After walking for just a few meters, Saikai finds a dude named Clay arguing with Mei, the dog-eared person he bought a painting from earlier on. He butts into the argument and finds out that Clay was asking her to enter the charity painting competition. She's a very talented artist and shouldn't put her talent to waste. Saikai agrees with Clay, so he tries to convince Mei to enter the competition after checking one of Clay's abstract paintings. Mei, however, is a very shy lady, so she couldn't muster up the courage to join the competition. To encourage her, Saikai decides to join the Royal Cup and win the race just so he can get her to join. Clay and Mei make a bet to join the charity competition if Saikai can win the race. So it's all set. To make the honey pot sweeter, Clay tells them about a gigantic fish prize for the person who takes the 5th position in the race. Hearing this, Lulun gets very feisty and begs her master to register for the race. However, they would make sure to come in 5th so they could win the gigantic fish prize. In the next scene, Saikai joins the other warriors on the racetrack. With thousands of people watching, including his wives, Saikai cannot afford to lose. After announcing the grand prize, which is to spend a day with the legendary Valkyries, Akka the kingdom's strongest female knights, the racers are all pumped to bring their A game in the race. Saikai gets on Lulun and waits for the starting gun. The announcer also explains the rules of the entire race. Violence is permitted to be used, so they should showcase their adventurous skills if possible. When the starting cannon starts, everyone races to the end. In the first few minutes, about 20 racers drop out of the race. Shockingly, Saikai's horse, Lulun, could only walk as she never even ate breakfast. Saikai knows he has to do something quick. So, he goes through his inventory and finds an evolution fruit before giving it to his horse. In the meantime, one of the adventurers summons a pack of wolves and their big boss to stop the other racers so she can become the sole winner of the race. Just before everyone gives up, Lulun runs like a mad donkey on steroids towards the finish line. As she approaches the wolves, everybody cheers her and her rider on to bring home the prize. Thinking she was going to be intimidated by the wolves, Lulun shocks everyone, even her master, as she jumps into the air and takes out all the wolves the adventurer summoned earlier. In split seconds, she gets to the finish and waits for the other racers to come by. After that brilliant display, all the other racers forfeit the match and give the win to Saikai and his Lulun. At the end of the race, everyone, including Mei and Clay, erupt in joy and laughter. However, Lulun wasn't so happy as she didn't come in 5th to win the gigantic fish prize. Saikai pets her and thanks her for at least winning the race. Lulun gets emotional and accidentally transforms into a beautiful young lady. At that instant, Artoria and Saria walk into the room only to find Lulun stark naked with her arms wrapped around Saikai. When Lulun finds out that she's been transformed into a human, she covers herself so Saikai doesn't see her nakedness. However, it's already too late as Saikai has seen the entire goods. Artoria gets very jealous of Lulun, but then she takes it out on Saikai for being so careless with his eyes. It's always the guy's fault. Sheesh. After beating him up, Artoria lines Saikai up and asks for an explanation. Saikai tells her the truth, but she doesn't believe him. Saria decides to morph into a gorilla just so Artoria can see that he's speaking the truth. After seeing her gorilla state, Artoria takes one last look at Lulun and takes her to a clothing store. 20 minutes later, Artoria dresses Lulun up and presents her to their king, Saikai. While everyone has a good time, two Valkyries, Claudia and Lorna, show up and arrest Saikai on baseless charges. They escort him out of the store and take him to the royal training ground to see their leader, Louise. In another scene, all captains of the Demon Lord's army gather in the Demon Lord's castle for a meeting with the Demon Lord's daughter, Lucia. When Lucia arrives, she greets and welcomes them all to their humble gathering. For aid, Craze laughs and teases her. However, Luida asks for the room to make her announcement. She tells the captain about her aim to merge with the human kingdom of Wimberg in hopes of making peace with them. Leia and a few other captains urge her to rethink her decision. Leia even narrates her last meeting with the Black Demon Dragon to Lucia. Apparently, after getting defeated by Saikai, she summoned the Black Demon Dragon for any information they could use against Saikai. The dragon's soul, however, forbids her from attacking Saikai as he lost the fight fair and square. Praise and several other captains try to talk her out of this, but Lucia has already made up her mind. Praise gets pissed at this recent development, so he storms out of the room and laughs maniacally as his plan is finally coming to fruition. Back in the royal capital of Wimberg, Saikai and the Valkyries finally arrive at the training ground. They release him from his restraints and introduce him to their master, Louise. Saikai looks around the training ground and finds Louise training a bunch of cadets. Lorna urges him to look closely and find out how awesome their master is. Saikai checks her out and confirms their claims. Louise was indeed powerful. After her training session, Louise approaches Saikai and her two subordinates. She introduces herself as Louise Baltz and gives Saikai a sword to spar with her. Saikai tries to talk himself out of an unnecessary fight. However, it was too late. At that instant, the students from Saikai's high school appear in the Barbados Royal Magic Academy. Kanazuka and her people check around to learn a thing or two about their new surroundings. They bump into Uyama, the school bully, and two of his goons. Uyama threatens Kanazuka and even pins her down to a wall. However, Kanazuka refuses to be threatened by such a bully, especially now that she's the student council president. She slaps Uyama and boos him away. Uyama leaves in disgrace after promising to end her. As their spar starts, Saikai does all he can to defend himself against Louise's attacks. He keeps trying to get himself out of the situation, but eventually, he's forced to fight her fair and square. After dodging a bunch of her attacks, surprising even Louise herself, Saikai learns two new skills: reflex defense and adaptation. He uses the two skills against Louise and wins the spar in a jiffy. Everybody, including Saikai, is in shock as nobody has ever beaten Louise before. After her fight, Louise bows down and pledges her loyalty to her new master, Saikai. Things get back to normal and Saikai gets to have some tea with Claudia. While they're at it, the king of Wimberg, who turns out to be the humble commoner from the cafe, Rands, is attacked by an assassin. Saikai, however, continues talking with Claudia about the Black Paladin, who used to be Louise's only rival back then. Now that he's defeated her once, Louise will finally be happy. Louise interrupts their tea party and thanks Saikai for making her feel human again. The defeat she suffered at his hands made her remember her humanity. Louise also gets emotional with Claudia and hugs her. Saikai laughs and thanks his stars for giving him godlike powers. Just then, Louise asks Saikai to teach her some tricks. Saikai again tries to talk himself out of this one, but as expected, it's already too late. As the two argue about their skills, a loud scream is heard from the royal palace. Saikai and the Valkyries rush over to the king's quarters and find out that he's been put to an eternal sleep. They forbid Saikai from checking out the king, but then Saikai uses his 3D vision to find out what's going on in the palace. After finding out the horrible state the king is in, he rushes towards the quarters, despite the Valkyries' warnings to stay away. As he scans the palace for the assassin, he finds out her real identity. Turns out the assassin is an 8-year-old girl named Olga. He finds her running towards the exit at impressive speeds. He takes a look at his database again and finds out that she's actually enslaved. Unable to understand what that meant, Saikai gets down one level lower and catches up to the assassin. Olga tries to attack him by throwing knives at him, but Saikai catches the knives and throws them back at her. Olga gets pinned to the wall, but then again, she frees herself and goes in for another attack. Saikai stops her attack this time and knocks her out. Just then, the Valkyrie Knights arrive and take Olga for interrogation. Saikai asks for the type of technique they'd be using on Olga. However, Louise urges him not to worry about that, and that Olga will not be tortured. As for the king, he was stabbed with a cursed knife and won't be waking up. Saikai feels for the Valkyrie and checks his database for curse-undoing spells. He asks the ladies to take him to the king's quarters. On getting there, Saikai gets the shock of his life when he finds out that the king is actually Rans, the humble commoner from the cafe earlier. Soon after, Louise introduces Saikai to the leader of their magic division, Florio. After the necessary introductions, Florio and the ladies beg Saikai to undo the curse and wake their king. Saikai summons up the courage to make it work as he walks close to the king and activates his magic creation spell. This spell enables its caster to actualize anything he visualizes in their mind. Saikai creates a mental image of the king's curse being lifted and wishes him eternal health. Surprisingly, this becomes reality, and the curse gets lifted. Seconds later, the curse's effects are reversed and King Rans wakes back up. The entire room is filled with joy as they check up on their kind king. Rans also thanks Saikai for his help and promises to reward him for his help. Saikai thinks of a fitting reward and asks the king to make it happen. A few thousand miles away, Zakia the commander meets with his wicked king and his entourage, Helio. Zakia beseeches the king to have mercy on the poor students they teleported to the Barbados Magic Academy. However, the king already had his mind set on using the Ice-Sky students as guinea pigs to fight the demons. In the meantime, Kanazuki and the others notice the strange treatment they're getting from the AUG students at the academy. While they ponder what could be wrong, Uyama and his goons show up and demand that Kanazuki tell them what she and her people are discussing. Initially, Kanazuki tries to shun them, but when they start making threats, she tells them about the horrible treatment they've been getting from the students lately. They claim responsibility for their students being ostracized from the entire school. From the information provided, it turns out they've been bullying the students there and striking fear in their hearts just as Helio advised them to do. Kanazuki and her boys condemn their actions, but the bullies still don't care about them. Eventually, Kanazuki leaves with her boys to avoid trouble. Meanwhile, Saikai and the king enjoy a warm bath together in the men's bathhouse. Over on the women's side, Louise, Lorna, and Claudia all bathe together as they talk about Saikai's impressive request for a reward. They all praise their new master and wish him a wonderful time in their academy. In the next scene, Saikai's three girls, Saria, Artoria, and Lulun all bathe in another smaller bathhouse. As they soak their beautiful bodies in the warm water, Artoria complains about Saikai spending too much time with the Valkyries. She gets jealous and thinks someone will steal her Saikai from her. Saria tells her to snap out of it and just accept things the way they are. After soaking their bodies, Saikai helps the king clean his back. There, they discuss their dreams and wishes. Saikai finds out just how childish and kind-hearted the king really is, and this leaves a smile on his face. Zakia keeps on begging his king to rethink his decision to use the kids in their war with the demons. The king, however, tells him it's already too late to do such a thing as they've already put enslavement bracelets on the kids. Before Zakia says a thing, an arrow flies through the window towards the king. Zakia saves the king and leaves to chase after the assassin. After he's gone, Helio informs his king about the alliance Wimberg is about to form with the demons. They have to do something about it quickly before shit hits the fan for them. The king, however, calms his wicked right-hand man down and tells him about the assassin he sent to take out the king. At that instant, Saikai wakes up to see all his wives alongside Florio and a few other ladies there for him. After he's back up, Artoria complains about Saikai's disappearance, but then Louise shows up. Artoria gets ready to punch Saikai as she thinks he's brought another one home again. However, when Saikai introduces Louise and her identity to them, Artoria comports herself and introduces herself as Saikai's girlfriend after Saria and Lulun. Louise also introduces herself and asks her master to begin their first lesson. Deep in the dungeons underground of the kingdom of Wimberg, Lorna dresses up as a BDSM princess and whips out her horsewhip almost as if she wants to torture poor Olga into exposing her origins. She ties Olga to a chair and whips her at regular intervals after asking a few questions. Saikai and the other ladies watch from the one-way glass, hoping to see a reaction from Olga. However, when torture doesn't work, Lorna tries emotional torture. She takes out a piping hot dish of pork cutlet soup and eats it in front of hungry Olga. This pisses Saikai off, so he busts open the door and takes over. He gives Olga the food and asks about the enslavement collar on her neck. Apparently, Olga cannot defy her master's order or else she'll fall and die due to the cursed effects of the enslavement collar. Saikai asks Louise if he could remove the collar and cancel the curse. However, Olga tells him it's not possible. Louise places her hand on the collar and it shocks Olga to the bone. In the meantime, the wicked of the Kraze Empire clenches his fists after hearing about the failed assassination of King Rand's life. He turns to Helio and asks him about the assassin. Helio, however, tells him not to worry, and that their enslavement collar would stop Olga from spilling too many secrets about their nation. Meanwhile, Zakia is seen training in the forest. While at it, he begins to have second thoughts about the king he's sworn to protect. He recalls the moment he caught up to the assassin. After thwarting his attempt to murder the wicked king, Zakia asks the man why he was so keen on ending the king. The man narrates the story of how his kind demon wife was murdered in cold blood by the disgraceful knights and left on the street to die like a rat. As he picked his wife to bury, he made his resolve to put an end to the worthless king ruling over their kingdom. Even after hearing his origin story, Zakia still refuses to side with the strange man. This means they have to settle things with their fists. The man shoots his arrows at Zakia, but Zakia uses his wind magic powers to destroy all his arrows. After rendering the man useless, he urges him to surrender to a higher power. However, the man thanks him for a good fight and bails out. Before he goes, however, he tells Zakia to rethink the morals of the people he's so keen on protecting. At that point, Zakia slashes a huge-ass tree in half. In the next scene, Saikai struggles to remove the enslavement collar from Olga's neck. With the ladies watching him intently, Saikai recalls a few spells from his book as he has trouble visualizing the actual magic spell he needs to work. He suddenly gets the idea to remember a historical freedom figure, Abraham Lincoln. The figure shows up in reality and uses his own words to release Olga from her enslavement collar. In split seconds, Olga is free and able to think for herself again. She sheds tears of joy until Saria pets her head. Lulun, however, picks up the pork cutlet bowl and has her way with it. After petting her, Olga settles down to introduce herself. It turns out that she was born a beast folk. The beast folk are one of the most hated species in the animal kingdom. As such, they were always maltreated. After taking out the elderly folks, the humans back then would take their kids and train them to be deadly assassins. Olga turned out to be one of the best assassins they've trained as she carried out countless missions and assassinations of very important people. She condemns herself for her sins and wishes death for herself. However, Saikai holds her hand and urges her not to worry about her past. All she has to do now is to work towards a better future for herself. Lorna asks if Olga can stay with them. Saikai tells them she can stay with them. Olga thanks Saikai for his hospitality, but then she warns him about the Kaiser Empire coming after him. Saikai tells her not to worry about them. He's strong enough to take them on. He then asks Louise for permission to house Olga, and she grants it to him in a jiffy. A few hours later, Helio hopes on a video call with Craze. While on the call, the two sinister dudes discuss the allegiance Lucia hopes to form with the Wimberg Kingdom. Craze laughs a little and talks smack about Lucia, the Demon Lord's daughter. Then, he urges his partner in crime to continue their plan to revive the Demon Lord. Saikai, on the other hand, finally learns to control his magic powers. He heaves out a heavy sigh and checks out his ladies. Just then, Louise shows up and asks Saikai for a favor. So it turns out that she's been called on by Black Paladin to help him take out some monsters that have been terrorizing their borders. In her absence, she asks Saikai to look after the King of Wimberg. Saikai without a doubt accepts his new role as the protector of the kingdom and sees Louise and her Valkyries off to their next mission the very next day. A week after the Valkyries' departure, Saikai is up on his toes checking every nook and cranny of the kingdom, hoping to find any issues quickly before they get too much for them to handle. While on his vigilante job, Saikai also made time to train his magic control. When he's finally done, he pauses to catch a breath. Guskel and Eris show up at that moment and introduce Saikai to the greatest holy mage of all time, Barnabas. Upon seeing him, Florio begins to shower praises on Barnabas. Barnabas butters his bread by recognizing his contributions to the Magic Society. Florio blushes after hearing such words and faints a little. Barnabas goes on to talk about a few more random issues before taking Saikai to see the king. King Rans teases Saikai and his party a little bit before turning his attention to Barnabas. On seeing Barnabas, his former teacher, Rans gets up from his throne and pays his respects. After paying his respects, he orders his people to come and give Barnabas a chair to sit on. After he's settled, they get serious about their discussion, which is about the Barbados Royal Magic Academy. At that moment, Kanazuki just finished a training session. However, the school still feared her and the other heroes that came from the other world. Hearing this, Saikai gets a hint and instantly thinks about his other friends. Rans talks about the wicked king of Kaiser and his plans to use the students from another world for his own selfish reasons. Just then, one of the royal guards barges in to report a horde of monsters approaching their town. When asked about the number count, the guard informs the king that they number up to 5,000. Several thousand miles away, Louise and the Valkyries finally reunite with Black Paladin to take down the monsters plaguing their kingdom's borders. Louise takes the initiative and summons her holy sword. When the time is right, she gives her girls the signal to attack the monsters. The Valkyries declare war on the monsters and attack them with all their might. During their fight with the monsters, Louise receives word from one of her people informing her about the monsters attacking their palace. Praise and Helio, who are both watching the entire situation from their magical orbs, laugh sinisterly as they've succeeded in trapping the Valkyries at the border. Saikai and his people all get to the top of the palace's walls. Lulun complains about her being hungry and wishes she could get something to eat that instant. Saikai watches her throw a fit and then moves on to check up on Oliga. Oliga makes him promise to pet her head after she's done fighting the monsters. Saikai promises to pet her head since she's been such a good girl. As he checks up on his other girls, all adventurers currently registered in the guild arrive on the scene to help the kingdom fight against the monsters on the field in front of them. After making all their dramatic entrances, Guskull gives his people the go-ahead to climb down the wall and face the monsters. Just then, the war between adventurers and monsters begins. Saikai is left behind while the other adventurers fight and bring down all the monsters using their own weird and unique powers. Guskull showcases the power in his muscles and girth as he takes down the monsters with ease. All Saikai and Barnabas could do was sit by and watch the entire thing play out on the battlefield in front of them. After taking them all down, a Beast King appears. Noad shows up and slices the beast to nothingness. Saikai checks on his girls and finds them holding their ground against the monsters on the field. Barnabas also extends his support and rains down fiery rain and tornadoes on the lot. Even Saikai is surprised at how powerful the old man is. He takes down all the monsters in one swoop and gloats about his power. Just when they thought it was all over, the real monsters show up. This time, they're all big boss grade level monsters and are certainly more than what the adventurers from the guild can handle. Nonetheless, the adventurers head over to the battlefield to face the stronger monsters. They try cutting them down with their own strength. However, nothing seems to work against these monsters. Saikai thinks long and hard about what to do. He concludes that he'd need some long-range spell to take out all the monsters at once. He stares at the sky and gets a brilliant idea. With no time to lose, Saikai informs Barnabas about his large-scale spell and lifts his hands to the sky. He conjures a Statue of Liberty and gives it a magic command to unleash judgment on the monsters on the plains. Initially, nothing happens. After a few seconds, however, the statue strikes down all harmful monsters on the plains. The lightning strikes all the monsters, including Eris and Guskull. Saikai takes a look at them and wonders if Guskull and Eris are truly as harmful as the spell says. Anyways, they've won the battle now and that's what matters. Praise, who just witnessed his entire ace get reduced to ashes, fidgets on his throne as he wonders what to do. Just then, the Liberty statue strikes him with the judgment of lightning and leaves him for dead. Saikai levels up and becomes much stronger than most of the people there. Ranz leaves Saikai and his people to continue watching over the walls while he goes out to check up on his people. Oliga rushes by to get her head pet by her boss. Saikai pets her head and smiles at her. Just then, Barnabas makes a very funny request to Saikai. He asks Saikai to come to his academy and become a teacher there. In the meantime, Kanazuki and her people are still being ostracized by the students in the Magic Academy. Saikai, after hearing the offer, politely declines it, giving the excuse of staying behind to protect the king and the town. However, Barnabas gives him options to sneak himself and his girls into his academy under very nice guises. In the end, Saikai is left with no option but to say yes as his ladies also support the idea of him being a teacher. After defeating the monsters, Saikai returns to the town to enjoy life once more. He goes on dates with each and every one of his wives separately, which makes them happy to be wed to him. One day, while resting, Saria shows up to Saikai's room and asks him to take Oliga out to play. Saikai smiles at the idea and takes his little sister to the orphanage park to play. There, Oliga joins the other orphans to play tag and football. Meanwhile, Saikai gets his alone time with the love of his life, Saria, and confesses his love for her again. Saria sobs softly and makes the other kids think she is being harassed by Saikai. Saikai joins the kids to play on the field when suddenly, a blimp appears in the sky announcing the commencement of the charity painting competition. Saikai quickly takes Saria to the competition to find out what May has to say. After introducing the judge, the MC kickstarts the art show. Clay Berger shows up with an interesting piece we modern-day humans call modern art. Thankfully, almost nobody could understand the piece of crap Clay drew on his canvas. Other artists also come by and showcase their art pieces. When it's Mei's turn, she sheepishly presents a wonderful painting of Saikai on his trusty steed, Lulun. She receives a big round of applause from the crowd and eventually wins the competition. After the competition, Mei meets with Saikai to tell him some good news. Turns out Berger just invited her to come study with him in his academy out of town. She wanted Saikai's blessing and he gave it to her gracefully. Later on, the Valkyries returned to Wimberg with honor. Louise thanked Saikai for his service to her town of Wimberg and wished him a safe journey to the Royal Magic Academy. Elsewhere, the Demon Lord's essence appears to Leia and Craze. He scolds them for failing to bring him the despair and strife he needs to revive himself. Craze and Leia apologize for this and promise to do better next time. Leia gets the wonderful idea to attack the Barbados Royal Magic Academy so they can take down all the kids of the royals and nobles there and win. Back at the academy, Kanazuki recalls her previous moment with one of her students as she blabs on and on about how good Saikai was to her back in their former world. She suddenly remembers the poor boy and wonders where he'd be by then. Little did she know that Saikai, whom everyone loathed back then, is now a hot cake who's coming over to teach at their magic academy. Saikai and his girls say their final goodbyes as they ride out of town in their carriages. Saikai is full of nothing but thanks and praise for the people he met and bonded with within the town. As they ride out of town, Barnabas asks Saikai if he regrets leaving the city. Saikai, however, tells him he doesn't regret a single thing. Barnabas lets him know that they're almost at the Magic Academy. Just then, one weird hero jumps on his carriage and hits a ride to the Magic Academy without permission.